to the June to meet that timeline, because there is not a council meeting, or there is a council meeting right at the very end of July that would make things a little tight in terms of process. So as you'll see from the timeline later on in the presentation, we're working to the council meeting of the 25th of June to have that initial proposal before you and for you to adopt for consultation. So just moving on to a quick reminder of the steps that have been taken already to date. We've looked at the voting system, and you have resolved to retain the first past the post system. That decision was taken in September last year. There was, under legislation, a requirement to advertise to the community the opportunity to demand a poll. No demand for a poll was received by the closing date in December, and so the first past the post system is retained. The other issue that has been already canvassed is that of Māori representation, and as we noted last time, Waitaki doesn't meet the population threshold to qualify for the establishment of a Māori ward. I do understand that other processes are underway to enable Māori participation in decision-making around the council table, and those are encouraged in legislation as well. The Māori ward is one methodology for that. So the next opportunity to review Māori representation will be for the 2028 electoral cycle. There has been some discussion in national political circles about the status of Māori wards and whether some changes to legislation might be coming down the pike at some stage soon. The advice that we have from the Local Government Commission is that at this stage, council should work to the existing legislation, and that it is unlikely that if there is legislative change, that it would be retrospective. And so any future changes would apply from the 2028 electoral cycle. But for now, we work with the legislation that's in place as it currently is.
I'm wishing to ask a question, if I may. Just curious, Stephen, are there any legislative obstacles or any legislative inducements to the creating of other ethnically based wards? I'm thinking specifically, we have per capita the highest Pacifica population in the country, apparently. So, I mean, would it be legislatively permissible for us to desire to have a Pacifica ward, for the sake of argument?
There isn't any provision in the current legislation for other wards. There is specific provision made for Māori, but not for any other type of ward.
So the answer is no.
The answer is no. Yeah, not under current legislation.
Thank you.
So just, I guess, what we're looking for today, noting that today is not a decision-making meeting, it's a workshop. And so we're not seeking any decisions from you, but we are seeking guidance and a steer as to the direction you would like staff to develop the options that we will be working through. And I note the good definitions that you have around a workshop. They're about providing a forum for staff to bring items to inform you, which we are doing today, and also to allow elected members to give guidance to staff. And that's really the key today. So we're seeking your guidance and I guess an early indication of some of your preferences, your views, the way that you would like staff to proceed in terms of putting a proposal together. And in particular, to identify any issues that would be valuable for us to explore around the representation issues. And they include, and this is not an exhaustive list, but for example, whether to establish additional community boards, whether to undertake some preliminary engagement or informal consultation with the community that could be around the community boards issues, but also other issues as well. And to engage with community boards, to engage with other stakeholders, and also to identify what representation options, so what ward and electoral options might be the preferences for us to consider and to further develop to bring those back for you in an initial proposal. So this discussion today is really to get some of your thoughts, to get a steer, and that will help inform us and the staff team that's working on this matter to bring that back to you for further decision down the track. And hopefully, as you've had a look through the presentation, which I understand was circulated, there are a few key questions that I've highlighted in yellow, and those are the things that we want to focus on today and get a steer from you. So if we move on and just a quick recap of the current situation, you know, the current ward structure. In this slide, I focused on the wards. We, of course, acknowledge also that there are two community boards, and we will come to discussion around those later. So six councillors elected in Oamaru, 1 in Waihimo, 2 in Corriedale, and 1 from Ahuriri. That's representing the current electoral structure. So what's changed since 2018?
If I may, again, I'd like to ask another question here, Stephen. I was quite surprised to see this figure of a population growth of nearly 10% across the district, because last year, when I think post-census, we had information about population growth from the Stats Department, and they said our growth was between 0 and 2%. And there was only one area, I think, in the whole of the south of the South Island that had increased by about 10%, that being Queenstown. So if the stats people say we only grew by 2%, how come you're saying we grew by 10? So
I guess I'd have to ask over what period that was. This is since 2018. So this is growth since 2018. Yeah. So 2% year on year would approximately equates to the 10%. So yeah, nearly 10% growth across the district, and you can see the highest in terms of the current ward structure, the highest growth occurring in Ahuriri with 17.8% change over that period since 2018, and in Corriedale 11.6% in the same period, and just under 10% across the whole of the district. Now those are in New Zealand Stats data. Those are the figures that we are using for the representation review. So I guess the population tells us one thing, and one question I'd like to ask you and just get your feedback is what other relevant changes have occurred since 2018? Are there other things that you as elected representatives are seeing around the district in terms of population shifts or changes where new development is occurring? Any changes in things like demographics and transport linkages that are making a difference to the shape or the flavour of those ward structures? So happy to just take any comments from you at this stage.
Guy?
Probably a little bit oblique, but I believe my ward, Corriedale, has increased its production, its intensive farming, the changes in farming practice, of course, which has led to bigger GDP for that area, for my area, I would say. But that's just because I'm probably quite biased.
Thank you, Guy. Jim?
I think from a demographic point of view, we're getting older. The percentage of the population north of 65 is increasing and has increased since 2018.
Probably one thing that I'm interested in, Stephen, is just the internal net migration. In May, I'm aware that a lot of people that have applied for residency will get their residency ticked off, and it's about 200,000 around the country. So it'll be interesting to see what the pattern will be for Waitaki, and for us to kind of keep an eye on that trend. If people aren't happy in their current jobs, that they've got their job offers, they will be shifting to other areas or other industries and sectors.
Are you seeing that already? Is that already starting to be visible in terms of?
I think that's something that we should be kind of keeping an eye on, and there is some indication that there will be shift from particular sectors.
You might be, Stephen, we had a presentation this morning, and included in that was some comments from our comms team, which had new data as well about the trends going forward to 2034. So there's a few points in there that I will discuss with you later. So really, if you think about those ones this morning, everybody, about the makeup of the district by 2034, how the shift is going down in Pākehā, up in Māori, up in Pacifica. So I think that also is something that you might want to consider as you're going through this discussion, but I will show you that information, Stephen, and we'll use that as to get more information after this session. Thank you.
Yeah, also a faster growing youthful population of Māori Pacific, as well, and as Ainsley had alluded to, around, like in a couple of decades' time, over 50% of our workforce in New Zealand will be Māori Pacific. So that's just something to kind of prepare for in terms of future of work, education, and infrastructure and everything. It'll have an impact.
Thanks for those comments. Those are all things that we can feed into the mix and be aware of and take into account as we work through the key points for discussion, which is our I guess set the scene for what we will be talking about and some of the other questions we'll ask in this session this afternoon. So we will, if you just flick on, Ainsley, thanks. We'll be looking at those questions that I went through, the number of wards, the boundaries, the basis of election, the number of elected members, community boards. And just a reminder that these need to be formally determined in the council's initial proposal by the end of July. You'll adopt that initial proposal, which is one proposal. You can't have options at that stage. If we want to work through options, we'll need to do that prior to that time. And so today's discussion is to get that initial view on these points. We'll develop up the options, seek input from the community if that's your preference, through an informal preliminary engagement process, and then come back to those issues again. So we look at three key concepts, and if you recall the presentation last time, these are, I guess, the pillars that underpin the way that we think about representation structure. And what the legislation puts in place are these three key concepts, not particularly well defined, but we do get some guidelines, particularly from the Local Government Commission, as to what things we're looking at. The first one, and I guess the key one, is communities of interest. And this is about identifying what communities of interest exist across the district. And we have to take on board, I guess, that we already have communities of interest expressed in our current ward structure. And one of the first questions I'll ask shortly is about whether those communities of interest that are expressed in the current structure are still relevant. So we look at those factors like how people relate to an area, but also how they live day to day, where they access services and facilities as well. And that helps us to think about the number of wards or constituencies and the boundaries of those wards. Then we look at the effect of representation. How do we ensure that those communities of interest are effectively represented? And that helps us think about the number of members that represent each community. It also helps us to think about the basis of election, and that's the question around whether we use a wards-based system of election at large or some combination of those two systems. And then the third key principle is fair representation. So that's about ensuring a relative equality of representation across all of the wards, so that each member is representing roughly a similar proportion of people across the district and within each ward. So we have a formula, the magic plus or minus 10% requirement that you're probably familiar with and recall from last time as well. There are grounds for going outside the plus or minus 10% requirement, and that has been used here in the past. And one of the questions is, do the same sort of situation and criteria still remain in place today? It is relevant to note that the Local Government Commission was happy to accept last time around a proposal that fell in part outside its plus or minus 10% requirement. Okay, let's move on to this first key principle, and that's communities of interest. So thinking about the way people relate to an area, the way facilities and services are accessed by residents in each ward, First question, I guess I'd like some comment and some views on is, do these current ward boundaries reflect the communities of interest that are in place across the district today? Do they still make sense from a communities of interest point of view? Clearly, you can look at a ward like Oamaru, predominantly urban, makes sense to have that as a community of interest. And then we've identified other factors that suggest the communities of interest around each of the other wards. So first of all, some comments, any discussion. Do those ward boundaries still reflect, in your view, the communities of interest across Waitaki?
John?
Yes and no. The Ahuroa ward is massive and just, I think it's far too big where the boundary is and probably needs to be pushed back to where it was.
Jim?
I probably disagree with that only because it would actually increase the disparity in terms of the number of electors or voters, ratepayers represented by the councillor. And I do think now with the Alps Ocean Trail that arguably Duntroon is the gateway to the valley. And yes, you're right, this is a very big ward. We're the 11th biggest district in the country. So from that point of view, maybe it's inevitable. The one question I had looking at the map, now that Kakanui is connected with water and sewer to Oamaru, and we've just plugged Mahino into the Oamaru water supply as well, I did wonder whether those two places were, well, no, I haven't got a view. I'm just saying I wondered whether they now more logically belong with Oamaru than in Corridor. That was all. It's I don't have, it's a thought, a question that occurred to me. I'm asking it. Other people might say vigorously and immediately, hell no, but I was just a question I was asking.
Guy, you had a comment?
Yeah, I'll run with John on that. I really, it's always been a bit odd to me that the Marafanua River wasn't the boundary. And I know there was some change because of trying to increase the population for Ahuroa to come within the regulations. But I'm quite, okay, I don't know, I'd like to see Western become part of Corridor. I believe the boundary change using Lords Road, Western Road, Essex Street, Homestead Road, Gowan Road would be a boundary change that I would like. But in reflection of that, whether I'm before you asking the question, well, that would mean that there would be then 3 councillors for Corridor, which would give us a balance within the council. We are a primary produce-based community. 40% or more of our income is from the farming area. And I believe that this council has never had an even representation from rural to urban. And I believe if we did that, we would have what I'm getting, and Ahuroa or Wahimo representation does not necessarily mean rural people. So I believe that if we had, it would then turn into 5 Oamaru elected members and 5 possibly or hopefully rural, giving the 11th elected person the right of change in voting. But that's how I've always seen that. I thought we were totally unrepresented from the rural population. And Corridor is growing extremely, not only in population, but in production. Thank you. I've probably gone ahead of your questioning, but it was all in context. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. I'm just going to grab Brent, who's got his hands up, and also because everyone's talking about your ward. So I'll give you an opportunity, Brent, and then followed by Cal, and also Heather, I'll give you an opportunity if you like.
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, look, for the Ahuroa, I believe it was changed due to that disparity in the numbers. And that, as we can see, we're getting some population growth, making it smaller. But if we also note in the stuff that we were provided, there was quite a number of people from country who were pro us going into our region because they're very similar to our other small communities, Duntree, Otamatata, Omarama, Ohau, all very similar in our demographics, what our, I guess our primary income is, which, you know, is a mixture of farming or agriculture and tourism, which is growing.
Thanks, Brent. Cal?
Yeah, I just concur with Brent on that one, and just in response to Councillor McCone's idea that Duntree should come back in, I'm pretty sure if you ask the ratepayers there, they've probably had better service from the Aouri ward board being approachable because it's now in our ward than ever was with one or two councillors. We've probably done more in the last year than was done over the last 4 or 5 years. But saying that, because it's, you know, obviously population base seems to be the major thing, you know, to take that away from the Aouri ward would, you know, even make it harder trying to get it across the line. So keeping it there is one thing. Just go back to one of the original questions here about, you know, how do we think the demographics is going to go? If you look what's happening in Omarama, like there's huge development in Omarama with the airfield development plus the development east of the town. You know, we could end up with another 400 or 500 people just in that area. Otamatata is still going ahead with maybe possibly more land being opened up there, and of course Kurau, we've got Robbie McElroy's development, which hopefully will get across the line. So there's possibly another 20, 30 houses going in there, which increases the population of Kurau. So I think, you know, the 7% we're short just now, we could well be over the line within, 10 years, if not sooner. So no offence to Councillor McCone, but I've got to put my hand up and say, no, Duntree definitely needs to stay in Aouri. None at all. But just the Marafanura is a common natural line rather than use the Canterbury Regional Council boundary, which goes way down to Georgetown and Awamoko. So, you know, comparing apples with apples, that part of the country is sort of the northern extremity and the rest of it is sort of intensive land. So I have no problem with that at all. I actually agree with you and Councillor Percival. You would think that that would have been the boundary. Just like the Waitaki would have been the boundary between Canterbury and Buddy Otago. But hey, you know, we don't get to make those decisions, do we?
Oh, any other comments, Jim?
Yeah, look, I probably want to politely challenge Guy. What he wants to have is a balanced council of 5-5. That's fine, but I'm not sure you can manipulate the wards to get there. Just on the basis that outcome would be desirable. The questions that the Local Government Commission would consider, were we to make the changes you've suggested, which I'm sure would trigger some opposition from within Western, would be what is the community of interest and what does it do for the relationship, the representation balance. And on both counts, I think the proposal would fail. Because I think Western, as an urbanised area now, has a greater community of interest with Oamaru than it does with rural general agricultural pastoral Corriedale. And I don't say that in an offensive or confrontational way. I just think it's a fact. So I mean, other councillors may be happy to propose that in the draft document. I think we'd get quite a lot of pushback, and I'm not sure it would prevail in Wellington.
Okay, Ainsley and then Guy.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, that is a good point. Remember, this is about effective representation. And I think if we do that, we would have to make the argument to support that. So we would have to be thinking about the commonalities of interest between Western and Corriedale as opposed to Western and Oamaru. So it'd be part of the argument. So we would be, I mean, the idea is out there. I think it's good to have these ideas out there, but yes, the actual commonality of interest to bring that boundary into a different line is relevant.
Thanks, Ainsley. Alex, then Guy, and then Jim.
So a couple of things, looking at the population of Western, I don't think it would have the effects you wanted in terms of, I don't think it would give you enough population to get the extra councillor, but Gary, the mayor, couldn't attend, and one of the things he wanted to put on the table was that currently Oamaru is slightly overrepresented compared to the rest. So whether one of the options was to reduce the Oamaru ward to 5 councillors, which would start to get some of that balance, not putting an extra councillor in another area, but yeah, so you'd have a council of 9 and the mayor, which would then bring a bit more balance between the urban and the rural. And would also mean that, you know, remuneration for councillors would rise as a result of the pool be the same, but over less number of councillors, and so make it more attractive to be a councillor and more viable for people who are in work to be councillors. So that's one suggestion he wanted to put in there, give a bit more of a urban rural balance, but also enable it to be a bit more of an attractive role for working people as a council.
Thank you, Guy, and then Jim T.
Thanks for that, Alex. My boundary change for was a little bit ridiculous to a degree, but by changing the boundary, probably not on the roads I mentioned, but what my aim was to include a lot of the lifestyle properties that I believe should or could be well served in the Corridor ward. So, but yeah, anyway, I'm just trying my luck.
Good try. Okay, Jim T.
Thank you all the way.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to come back to the discussion around Hariri and point out that it's 17.8% increase of population over the last 5 years. They are leading the charge, and it may be that at this stage there are no changes, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't flag the possibility going forward that as a high growth area there could be some contraction of boundaries in the future. And as far as Wahimo goes, keep your sticky hands off.
Oh, any other comments with this one?
Any feedback, do any of us have any views on whether Kakanui and Mahino belong more in Oamaru and Corridor?
That is so ridiculous, Josh. It's hardly worth a reply. They are definitely, in fact, like many Westonians, they identify as that, and the Kakanuis do as well. So what you've got to remember is that they do not call themselves Oamaruvians. And I think that's definite. And this, hence I rest my case. What I said, I actually believe it.
Okay.
There's some really good points raised there, and those are some of the possibilities and options that we can be modelling, and have a look at what impact that has on the data, and we could bring some of those options if they are viable back to you to consider as part of developing that initial proposal.
I'd just like to raise one that's been put forward to me, which sort of took me a bit by surprise. I'd just like to get your views on this. What do you think of combining Hariri and Corridor? I'd just like your feedback on that as an option, because we have to. I will have to consider all options when I do the paper. So I'd really like your feedback. It's not something I brought up; somebody else did.
John.
My simple answer is no, but I'll clarify that by saying that you're talking about two different demographics. You're also talking about 100 Ks in difference, at least, and that probably requires 140 Ks. And so if you want a fair representation of what's across the district, you're just too far. You're divorcing yourself. It's a bit like our current MP at the moment. He's spread from Wanaka to Geraldine. You can't do justice to it. And the biggest problem we have in this whole district at the moment, we're one of the biggest areas, the smallest population, but it's communication. And if I live in Duntroon, I'm going to represent Twizel and Marama. I'm not going to drive up there every day to find out what's going on. But if you've actually got a representative that's up there or in that area, you're actually going to get far better communication from the top to the bottom. That would be my reason. It's not about population. It's about geographical challenges this whole district charges.
And usefully, we did put that as an option that we discounted in 2018 and the commission agreed with us. So just to let you know that it's been raised again to reconsider, and just letting you know that the commission did not support it so they supported us by ruling it out as an option for our district last time.
So it's a bit like building something, measure twice and cut once, have another go.
Thanks, Ainsley. I've got Brent with his hand and then Lisa.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't support that. I mean, we are different districts, different types of farming. We're seeing a lot more tourism growth up around this area as well. Lots of small, as I say, similar types of communities between Duntrin, Kuroud, Mtara, Marama, Ohau, which all have very individual needs. They're very different to the other wards. So certainly not something that I believe. And to be fair, it's not broken, so I'm not sure why we'd look at changing it.
Thanks, Brent. Lisa?
If I maybe full conversation around this all those years ago was the microphone. It's working now. I was just going to agree with you, Councillor Cowles, and say that the conversation all those years ago with the previous representation review really focused on the communities of interest in those areas, which are so different. And I believe that was the core reason why that was accepted.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Cal?
Yeah, as the chair of the community board up there, I'd have to again agree with Lisa and Brent. The areas are so extreme. We had 3 councillors say in the area they'd still struggle to get from Duntroon to Ohau. I do. When we've got a few issues in Ohau or Marama, trying to get there to meet people all at the same time is really hard. And with 5 board members, we can spread that load across the 5 board members plus Brent, which makes it a lot easier, and the community can then communicate any issues or anything we need to sort out is a lot easier than say having 3 councillors or something.
Thanks, Cal. Jim?
Yeah, Stephen, this is a matter that you could possibly advise us on better than anyone. If we did do that and amalgamated Corriedale and Hariri, there'd be, I think, north of 6,000 total population. Looking at the figures we've got here, 1732 and 4408. And in fact, if you then had 3 councillors, because 2 would be representing 3,000 people each, so that'd probably be grossly disproportionate relative to the other wards. But if you did have 3 councillors, they would actually then be the lowest of any of that have the best representation of anyone, just over 2,000. Whereas at the moment, the best represented group is Corriedale, because each councillor represents 2204. Oamaru is, the best is Hariri, then Corriedale, then Oamaru. So Oamaru at the moment isn't as low as the others, or 2 of the others. But if we do the amalgamation you've mooted, then the representation per 3 councillors will be just over 2,000, 2,000 naught and something residents. Whether that would be acceptable would be within the plus or minus 10%, but it might be deemed to be a reason not to do it.
Ainsley?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, it's good to have both sides of the argument, and that's exactly how we put it last time. But I come back to the way we argued it last time. Lisa was right. It's commonality of interest, and those are the sorts of things that we'd have to come back to. You've got to have a balance. You have to deal with population and demographics and, which is what we're discussing at the moment. So yes, the effect of the representation may be more appropriate, but will it fit? Will it be acceptable to the communities of interest? Will it work across such a vast difference? So there will be an argument along each side, but I just wanted to put it out there because it was part of our submission last time. We ruled it out. I wanted to check in on you to make sure that is there new information that I can put in the argument. So thank you very much for your contributions.
Thanks, Ainsley. Jim?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to go back to what Mr. Palmley communicated on behalf of the Mayor, advocating that Oamaru possibly dropped 4 councillors. I'm not sure that's what it's. Sorry, I'm Freudian. And also taking into account councillor Percival seeking a rural town balance. We also have to give cognizance that the previous mayor worked out of Wahimo, and therefore there was a balance, and it might be just a case of swings and roundabouts.
Okay, we're going to carry on. Stephen, we've got a stack of pages to get through.
Thank you. Really good discussion, and I think we've probably largely covered the other 2 questions on that slide because they're part of it. The question around the number of wards is that about right? We've sort of canvassed in some of those discussion around do we combine any of the wards, and yeah, there would be challenges in doing that. Yeah. So look, thank you for that. We'll use that information as we put the proposals together. So the next question is effective representation. How do we ensure that each of those communities of interest is effectively represented? And so the first question is the number of councillors. Is the overall number of councillors about right? Does that number enable effective representation of those communities? And should we consider having more or fewer councillors? And we've had one option already put on the table in the discussion today. Are there any other views around the number of councillors as a function of providing effective representation? And I guess that's particularly relevant when you think about the geographic size, and that's been an issue raised already. The distances that elected members need to travel to ensure coverage of the district. So one of the questions that we need to canvass, we'd be interested in your views.
John, then Guy.
Again, I think we've covered it off, and to me, I don't, not worried about population base or anything else. It's about communication. And communication now, to me, yes, we put a hand up to do that job, but I'm actually conduit now for getting information back to this council from the ratepayers. How do I put that? So as rural people don't work from 8 to 5, and sometimes when they're got a problem, they will just ring on the phone, and they're not going to sit there and wait for the customer services to find out whether Paul's sitting there can take his message. They won't leave a message. They want it done now. So the first thing they ring is me, and they want me to sort it. And so I think at the moment it's not broken, but I think we need that there as a conduit of information backwards and forwards, and we actually need to be better at it than we are.
Thanks, John. Guy, did you have your hand up too?
Yeah, but one of my rationale behind me wanting another councillor in Corridale is, in fact, just for example, right now, there's John and I who are Corridale members, and we're both basically dryland farmers. But the biggest development in Corridale has been the dairy industry in the last decade. And we haven't had anyone from that that sort of, whatever we call it, that area representative council. It's a huge part of our GDP. Like, now I know it doesn't mean that if we had a third member, he would be elected from that community. But I just know over the years I've been here, I've had very little communication with the dairy industry unless I've promoted it myself, or there's been a certain need for representation as far as the roads go or some traffic problem. That's about it. But I believe we've got a huge gap there in representation. So, but that again doesn't mean an elected is someone's going to be elected for that. It's just a thought.
Thanks for that, Guy. You're kind of alluding to sector representation as well. So it's just something to be considerate, of. And it's also an engagement piece around election and campaigning and encouraging people from the sector to be able to put their name in the hat as well. So you've raised some valid points. Jim?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do take on board when we look at the examples, the likes of Kaipara, which has probably got as many travel problems as we do, and they're working on more population, 9 councillors. And as a beneficiary, it doesn't make one iota to me I view my time on council as community service. But if we were encouraging more people out of the workforce and being able to offer them another $5,000 or $8,000 a year could make quite a major difference. So I would be reasonably comfortable in going back to 9 councillors if it meant that we were going to facilitate a more representative community round the table.
Thanks, Jim. Jim?
Well, yeah, I'm not quite sure whether the reduction would in and of itself guarantee a more representative or representation of the community. I've just again done some maths. Based on the figures in front of us for this review, each councillor, each of the 6 councillors in Oamaru currently has a population or represents 2,286 people, meaning that there are a total of 13,716 people in Oamaru who can vote, who are electors or who are represented by us. Now, if we went down to 5 councillors, then each councillor in this ward would represent 2,743 people, which would be significantly more than Ahuriri at 1,732, Waihimo at 2,337 and Corriedale at 2,204. My experience, certainly on Banks Peninsula, when we proposed to reduce councillors, it provoked a surprising and quite vehement response. People got quite loss averse about that and objected, took the matter to the local government commission, and they won and we lost. So the commission wouldn't let us reduce the number of councillors. I rather suspect that if we did make the change that is suggested, and I'm not opposed to it in principle, but I would fairly confidently predict that there would be people in Oamaru who would object. And I would actually then say that I wouldn't be confident about how the local government commission would see the matter. And I think the disproportion, the imbalance created relative to the other wards as a consequence of the change might actually tip the balance in favour of the status quo from the local government commission's point of view. Stephen, is that a reasonable assessment?
Those factors would certainly be likely to arise. We have got those figures in just in a few slides' time. We look at the sort of effective representation across all of the wards, and obviously anything that's outside the plus or minus 10% would trigger a review by the local government commission, and any appeals or objections would trigger a review by the commission as well. So there would be a double whammy of issues that would be considered, and certainly that would at first blush, without other adjustments, that would be looking like going well outside the plus or minus 10%, but it may well be that with some other adjustments, and that's kind of some of the modelling that we could consider.
Stephen, I just wanted to briefly touch on effective representation. And I guess just putting it out there, what does effective representation mean, or what does effective mean if we were to almost consider governance skill set competency based? You know, like for elected representatives as well, to be included in the mix?
Really good question, but unfortunately slightly outside the remit of this piece of work, which is really about looking at the resources, the number of councillors as a means of providing effective representation. The questions of the calibre of councillors, the sectors they represent, the demographics around a council table sit elsewhere, and by and large then come under the responsibilities of each council to pursue its own directions and principles there. This process is really about the numbers, the boundaries, and going as far as is possible to get the right structure numerically to get to that point. But those other considerations are certainly significant. Okay, so let's move on to this next one, which is about just flick back to the effective representation, the one prior, Ainsley. Again, I think we've had some discussion around this as well, but is the number of councillors about right? Does this enable effective representation? Should we consider having more of you? I just included that table there. I know we talked about it already of some comparisons, just really to note that Waitaki is pretty much par for the course and in the middle of the bunch in comparison with other councils of similar size. So certainly not out of the ballpark. There are some that are smaller, some that are larger. So there's certainly room for movement and in either direction, and still not being out of kilter with others. Okay, let's move on to this question of the basis of election. This is always quite an interesting one. And we are required to ask the question, should members be elected by ward or elected at large? That is, they are elected across the entire district, or a mix of wards and at large, which is an option as well. So currently, we do have all members elected on a ward basis. But there is the option of elections at large, and I've included a couple of lines from the Local Government Commission guidelines about where, in particular, an at-large election seems to work effectively. So that point 5.21, the general characteristics of territorial authorities that have opted for elections at large include that the district has a relatively compact geographical area and or shared community of interest at the district level, that is across the whole district, and or communities of interest that are spread across the district rather than being geographically distinct. So where it's harder to identify different communities of interest. And I guess the note, the awards certainly are appropriate where a district has several distinct communities of interest which can be best served by separate representation, and that's been the case that's been made for Waitaki in the past. I have included just a couple of slides there to illustrate the three systems. At large is pretty much as it sounds. This is just an example from another council that I put in, a council with 13 councillors. So in at large, an entirely at large system, each elector would get one vote for the mayor plus whatever the total number of councillors. So 13 in that case, and there are no wards. So everybody is elected across the entire district. A few examples across New Zealand include Kawerau, Upper Hutt, Invercargill, Dunedin, Kaikoura, and Whanganui. The second system is the one that you are familiar with, a wards-based system where each councillor is elected from within a specific ward. So each elector gets one vote for the mayor, plus whatever the number of votes is for the councillors in their ward, and you're familiar with that system here. The third one, if you can just perhaps flick on, Ainsley. Next one, yeah, the mix of wards and at large is used in a number of places, and it does provide an interesting contrast, but it means that some councillors are elected by ward and some councillors are elected at large. So they're voted by all of the electors in a district. So in that election example, all electors would get one vote for the mayor, because the mayor is obviously elected separately. They would get a specific number of votes for the number of councillors in their ward, as you currently have here, plus a certain number of votes for whatever number of councillors are elected at large across the district. And some examples there: Nelson, New Plymouth, Gore, Lower Hutt, and Kapiti Coast are some of the councils that are using that. And I guess I would be interested in just your views on, is there any wish for us to explore the option of changing the basis of election from wards to either entirely at large or a mix of wards and at large? Certainly, it doesn't appear that there is, the characteristics of a district with a compact geographical location would not fit Waitaki, but we need to canvass that question as well. So interested in any comments.
Tim?
Would Gore be a comparable district to ours? And what's its geographic spread?
I think it's relatively smaller.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. Than Waitaki. And I guess they've looked at communities of interest across that district. It's not one that we're actively working with, so I haven't been involved in their discussions this time around. But I guess they've looked at the communities of interest and decided there's enough uniformity and use an at-large system.
What would be the benefit of doing that, and how might it change outcomes?
One of the typical responses we get from councils who are in that situation is that they find that there is it assists with the pool of candidates for elections because you're finding candidates from across the whole of the district, and councillors are representing the whole of the district anyway, but it enables potentially better representation or better pool of candidates. There is the ability for particularly in one of the smaller geographical areas for councillors to back each other up quite well and operate across the whole of the district. There are not so much the territorial approaches that some councils get into as well.
Could it create issues around Guy's earlier concerns about having, solid rural representation?
Yes, for a larger area with distinct communities of interest, one of the potential pitfalls is that you don't get adequate representation of different sectors across the district. And you might, and certainly there have been concerns in other districts that candidates tend to be drawn more from urban areas because that tends to create more of a pool of candidates.
Guy, I feel that everyone are quite happy with, the making sure that we represent the whole district, but Guy, I'll let you make a comment.
The three LGC guidelines that you've put in here, we're outside of all of those. We actually, so I think I don't know, I'm quite comfortable the way we are because we have distinct differences between Waihima. I mean, we've got a mountain or hill range between us and them anyway. And the same goes for our area. It's totally different. There's commonality with the fact that we all push together to get the right same things, but it's not actually localised. Okay.
John?
I think, again, status quo for me, and for 3 or 4 reasons. I've already named 2 or 3 of them, and that's communication and keep in touch with you. And I know history must go on, but if you wind it back to the days of the old county council and the boroughs, everybody came from a certain part of that region, and for the very reason so they could communicate with those people. And I think what we're losing inside of in local government, we're collecting a tax for the betterment of the district. And if you can't talk to the person that you elect to represent to spend that tax, then we're actually losing sight of what we're here for.
Thank you, John. Jim?
Look, we're going to be bombarding our community with a hell of a lot of changes and big issues and contentious issues this year. My instinct is, in this particular general area, I would be advocating as little dramatic change as possible. And the difficulty I see with having the representation as a mixture of wards and at large is where would you reduce the number of councillors currently? And would it, paradoxically, would the unintended consequence be to mean perhaps to dispossess or disadvantage Ahuriri or Corridale or maybe even Waihima? I don't know. So my instinct is, as I say, the community is going to have get asked enough questions from us. I'm really not sure there's any evidence of demand for this change to be introduced, and I personally, with John, I'm totally, for those who are pragmatic reasons, I totally favour the status quo.
Yeah, I think John summed it up well with our local MP who has such a huge area to cover. There's no way he would know what's happening in the communities he's representing, and we would end up with the same problem here if we had ward, not ward, but what's it called? At large voting, he would end up maybe with no representation in the area ward at all. He would have 5, board members down in Oamaru, possibly, it might not happen either, but it's just nonsensical.
Thanks, Cal. I think you've got an answer there.
Yes, yeah, it's good to have those views. So we move on to the question of fair representation, and this is the plus or minus 10% requirement that we talked about before. If we just, I'll just. Happy to continue for
So you can
now.
do with this one and then we'll
Yes.
have a 5
Sounds
minute
great.
break and then come back.
Good. So let's just go down to the table at the bottom of that slide, which was this is the 2018 data. And you'll see there that, as you're aware, Ahuriri fell well outside the plus or minus 10% margin by considerable margin there, 21.95% outside the average. A couple of slides over, we've got, no, hang on, before we go that, just back one. A reminder again that the council's case to accept that difference being outside the plus or minus 10% margin was well argued. It was based on factors including, I haven't included everything here, but I guess some of the key ones, the community of interest between those in the Duntroon area and the balance of the Ahuriri ward, and that the links between them are stronger than other links would be. The fact that altering the boundaries of the Ahuriri ward to further make it compliant would limit effective representation of the communities of interest by dividing a community of interest between wards, and that's something that the Commission is quite strong on avoiding, dividing those communities of interest. And also that comprises a number of isolated communities and consequently needs a separate councillor to be effectively represented. And the Commission essentially agreed with the Council's proposal, and it agreed, as it says there, as compliance, if it had to fit within the plus or minus 10%, that would limit effective representation of communities of interest by either dividing a community of interest between wards or by uniting a ward with two communities of interest with few commonalities. So not joining disparate communities together and not dividing communities with commonalities. And they certainly accepted the geographical isolation argument as well. I thought it was also significant that the Commission went out of its way to note that the present four-ward system, existing since 2007, is seen as very familiar to residents, and it saw that as a positive as well. So if we look at the current data, this is
Stephen, if I just might add one comment there. I've added again a copy of the report that I did, the submission I did to the Local Government Commission, from which those extracts came last time, and also the representation guidelines that were produced then to back it up. So it's in the folder again. It's in the August 2023 folder. I've copied them across this morning. So you've got a copy of the full report there in your folder now at the bottom. Thank you.
right.
This could be your future line, just think about that. You could be sitting here in 15 years' time, ruling the world.
So just looking at the 2023 data, this is the Stats NZ population estimates as at the 30th of June 2023, and this is the data set that we are required to use for this representation review. And you'll see that we are still in essentially the same situation as we were, although the margin for Ahuriri is a little lower than it was last time, so it's come back a little bit closer to the plus or minus 10%. And I think we've probably canvassed this already, but the question is for you, do the same grounds for exemption that we argued in 2018-19 apply today?
Yes.
Thank you. And I have noted the other comments that you've made, so I will be using those as an argument to work on those options, work them up for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ainsley.
We'll just do one more slide because that brings us to the end of the council part, and then we can move on to community boards after afternoon tea. So this is just a summing up really of the key questions. So Ainsley, if you can just flick over to that next one. In terms of broad ward structures, keeping other than minor boundary changes that might be required, are we happy to retain the existing ward structure?
Yes.
I'm not hearing any arguments around the table.
This is a, do you support this question rather than a decision?
Yep. I'm just wanting a sense of indication from you as elected members as to, are you comfortable with retaining the status quo? We can look at other options, and we may include some when we bring those back to you in future, but broadly is our starting point for developing these options, working from the status quo.
Yes.
So surely this discussion will lead to some recommendations from yourself. So I reserve my agreement to that until such time as you come on back.
Cal, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I think, should we consider combining Aru and Corriedale? I think there's two different demographics altogether. Should we consider transferring areas into Ahuriri? I think we're pretty well, right with the type of demographic we've got. And I think the main thing is here, we've got to look outside the population thing. That needs to be number one. And the fact is, it's just such a vast area. It can't be any different than the way it's set up now, unless all of a sudden we get flying carpets or whatever, It's just too big an area.
Thanks, Cal.
And the second question there, we've again talked around already. Do we need to look at any boundaries adjustments? One of the things we will look at just in terms of picking up the latest data as to whether we should be looking at tweaking the boundary of Waimaru Ward just to reflect growth there. So we will look at that unless you have any further updates.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, I've had a quick chat with Isabel, who is over there in the corner, about mapping things. And, one thing we might do on that, if the view is that we might want to keep the status quo, we have to consider options. So one thing might be to move the Ahuriri boundary down to include Ngāpara.
Okay.
Yes, but the thing is, that would be an option that we could rule out if that is what you think. So that's what I mean. In terms of boundary adjustments, we may go there to show that it wouldn't be right for whatever argument we put together. So just bear in mind that as Guy said, I want to see options and I'm reserving the right to have them. So that's fine. We will move boundary lines around to give you the opportunity to consider other options.
Okay, Jim, then John, then Jim, then Guy. And then
Look,
after the tea.
very, very quickly. In Parliament, they have to play with the boundaries because of the parliamentary decision that 20% of the electorate, the voters, have to be in the South Island. So they're constantly expanding the boundaries of electorates because of the shrinking population or the growing population in the north relative. We don't have that obligation. So the idea that we might move Ngāpara into Ahuriri because we could, to my mind, if we don't have to, we don't even bother thinking about it. The one thing that did seem to me here to warrant some possible consideration would be some to actually look at whether there is any urban growth in Oamaru, because the option 2 doesn't say there has been, it just suggests there might have been. But I think we would need to look at that, particularly if we're going to look at any variation in the number of councillors in Oamaru. Because if the urban boundary changes and the population numbers increase, that would have a bearing on the number of councillors who would be in the ward. So my instinct is that I'd say yes to 1, no to 3, and yes to 2 as well. But specifically just looking at whether there needs to be a minor boundary adjustment reflecting what could be urban population, urban growth in Oamaru.
And we will certainly look at that because of the fact that we've had this conversation and because we've looked at the growth statistics. So yes, we would need to be showing options in that sphere.
The point I'm trying to make is that you cover the area that's geographically the same as what you're representing. And if you keep moving the boundary down for population, I ask the question, is it based on population or is it based on funding from the rates collected in that area and how in proportion? So you actually end up with looking after a smaller area and spending that money that you're collecting in a bigger area as such. And that's a very poor way of putting it, but you've got to represent equally what you also are voted for. And if you start bringing it down for how many people live in that area, then you'll get outvoted every time when you need infrastructure in the area that it's coming from.
Jim, did you You had your hand up and then Guy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The one issue that concerns me in the shifting of boundaries, and I think it's critical to it, to effective representation in a democracy, is one, people have access to an advocate, and two, the advocate has a reasonable opportunity to participate at council. So I know the Ahuriri councillor travels further than I do, and I travel an hour and a half a day to come and sit around this table. So Brent's probably doing 2 hours plus a day to attend meetings. So I'm very much in favour of status quo on that basis.
Thanks, Jim. Guy.
Yeah, I'll just go back to what I mentioned earlier, which was the boundary between Ahuriri and Corridor. It's a very jagged line at this point, and I believe the Maraphanua should be the boundary. There's not a great deal of population that would affect the numbers for Ahuriri in that area. I don't believe so. It's just that it's a very jagged line at the moment. It doesn't really make much sense to me. I mean, Duntroon is still included in Ahuriri. It's the Maraphanua being the boundary.
Actually, Guy, I'd have to agree with you on that one. You know, I've always thought about that Smiley's Road for some reason would be in the Ahuriri. It's just, you know, it's just so out there because it's, you know, it's just a different farming community altogether, you know. So yeah, I agree with you. I think the boundary, boundary should probably be the Maraphanua.
So I've noted that and we'll look into that and see what difference it makes. It may not be a lot, but we'll look into it. Thank you.
Cool. Can we have one more and then we might have a quick break? Stephen, Tim.
Just the only thing on the Ahuriri boundary being with the Maraphanua, yeah, I agree in principle with what's been said, but I just wonder from a practical and you know, simplicity perspective, if people, because we've got the two regional jurisdictions, if the people of Ahuriri all know that they're aligned, that their boundary is aligned with ECAN and everyone else is with ORC, it kind of, when consultation and stuff's occurring in that space, I guess it would help keep things all the same. That would be my only concern, but I'm not saying I disagree with the other, but
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah, I can hear what you're saying, but you go and ask the farmers along that Smiley's Road what they think of that, because you know something, they have to pay two sets of rates, had to talk to two separate bloody regional councils, which had got miles apart on what their philosophies are. The natural thing, I'll go back to the Waitaki River. Why was the Waitaki River not the boundary for between Canterbury and Otago? All because, well, I know it was, all because a couple of streams run into the Waitaki River. You know, someone in Wellington had to think outside the square there and go, well, actually, what's, you know, where's your heart? You know? Yeah. So I think the Maraphanua is a good point.
Thank you, Carl. Stephen, I think.
Thank you. That's given us some good feedback and some options that we can work up into the next stage. So happy to pause now.
Okay, so we'll pause for about 5 minutes or so and have morning, afternoon tea, and then we'll come back. And then we've just got the community boards to go. All right. Okay, cool. You're dismissed. You can have a coffee now. Yep. All right, we're going to kick start and we've got 25 minutes left. And we've also got Brent online as well. So I think we'll carry on. Stephen, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, let's turn our attention to community boards for this section of the discussion. And the legislation, the local electoral act is quite specific. That council is in during the process of undertaking a representation review must look at the question of community boards. It must determine whether there should be community boards, and the nature and structure of any community board, including the number of those, the number of members, and basically the same questions that we've thought about in terms of the council. So the current status is there, as you know, two community boards, Ahuriri, Waihemo, each of them with five members. So reflecting, I guess, a population per member of roughly 400 to 500 per member in both of those community boards. It's worthwhile, I think, to just reflect on why we have community boards. There are many community boards across New Zealand, many councils that make use of the community board model as a way of adding to their representation. One of the comments from LGNZ that I think is useful is that community boards typically represent a smaller area within their council to ensure that smaller communities' voices aren't lost in the big picture conversation or kōrero. So for community boards, I guess, are about providing a voice and an input into decision making at a finer level than at the larger ward or council level. It's also important to keep in mind that there is no single model for community boards. Each council must set its own delegations and delegated authorities to community boards, and they may vary from council to council, and they help to set the effectiveness and the function and the role of community boards. Councillor Jim. Yep, Jim.
But what is important, I have to note, is that I'm pretty sure unless the legislation has been changed, only a community board can vote a community board out of existence. We can decide that we won't fund them, but we cannot unilaterally disband them, as I understand it. That may have changed, but it certainly was the case. The other question I would have, Stephen, I noticed that looking at the representation, the relative numbers of community members represented by each representative on the boards is currently the same, but there doesn't appear to be any sort of plus or minus provision. In other words, I would have thought it might have been possible for us to amend the number of members in a community board without necessarily worrying about transgressing the plus or minus 10%. Is that correct?
Yes, so there isn't a plus or minus 10% from one community board to another because they are separate entities. But if a community board was to be subdivided into subdivisions, which is the case in many places, not here, then the plus or minus 10% principle would apply between subdivisions.
Well, maybe just to kick things off, perhaps, what would the community boards think about a reduction of one per member? One member in each, or perhaps one member less in Ahuriri. And we've had a huge difficulty getting people in Ahuriri to stand for the board and for the council. Would it be actually, would it work if we actually had a more compact number and we didn't have to have so many issues with by-elections and those sorts of things? I'm just wondering whether history is telling us that one less might make things easier for everyone.
Geez, I might get in trouble for this, but yeah, well, I could probably agree with you there, Jim. It does help that we've got 5 because it's such a big area, but whether it's 5 or 4 probably wouldn't matter too much. You wouldn't want to go any less than that because otherwise you just can't get anywhere. But if that ended up being the way the bloody dice rolled, well, so be it. But it is good having 5. We can cover each other quite a bit. And but yeah, I don't think it would be too much of a concern.
Thanks, Cal. Brent.
Yeah, Cal, I'd probably agree with you there. I guess the point is, if it was 4 on the community board and then the elected members on there as well as the council, we've got 5. So, voting and those sorts of things would remain in a, sort of an easy thing, and it has been very hard. I don't think I've actually been elected in the 12 years of there or on council yet, so it's a hard thing to get people up to put their hand up for this thing. In saying that, I think we've had an incredibly effective community board this year that's actually getting some buy-in from community, and that might change things. But yeah, I tend to agree that I don't think it would matter here nor there too much on those numbers.
Well, it would also make it slightly more attractive in the sense that the remuneration for each member would increase.
Ainsley?
What do you think the feedback would be from your Ahuriri ward community? My question is to Cal and to councillor Cowles.
I'll go first on that one. Good point. Do they even know we exist? Hard to say. They probably know we'll put it this way. They'd certainly know we had existed if we disappeared because things just wouldn't get done. Because how does the council know what to look at unless the feedback is coming from us to the council or to the councillors? That's the biggest problem. You know, we've got, like, again, we go back to was it 1,500 square kilometres or some bloody thing? It's such a big area. I mean, how would the people in Ohau get anything done if Mike, for instance, just now in Marama didn't take a passion for Ohau and go up there and check stuff? That, you know, that's the logistics of the Ahuriri community area. It's such a big area. The five of us, we cover such a big area and get things done. Without that there, that just wouldn't happen. Going back to your initial question, would the community be upset about it? If they actually found out what we did, yeah, they probably would be.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think with that, the five, now that Duntreen's in there, works pretty well because we do have, each of them have sort of taken that under their wing, each of those small communities. So, you know, one looks after Duntreen, Kurau, Otamatata, Marama, and Ohau. But how would they react? I'm with you, Cal. I'm not sure. You know, the lack of interest in actually putting names forward, and I guess we are getting more people at our public forums these days than what I've ever seen. So I suppose that there's more of an interest than what there used to be. But based on previous history, for me, I'm not sure there's that much interest. But you're right, Cal. Without it, there would suddenly be a whole lot of interest.
Thanks, Brent.
Sorry, if that's the case, I wonder if we could just hold that thought for the question that is going to come from Stephen further down the slides, because there's a point that question was aimed at. Thank you.
Just to answer your other question, councillor Jim, the council can, through this process, the representation review process, propose the disestablishment of community boards, but it is subject to public consultation. That can be part of. So that's part of this process is you can consider both establishing or disestablishing community boards through this process.
To Electoral Act, which is this process.
So, happy to take.
I'll just make the comment and look, can't hear them. They know what they're doing on community boards, but I'll just make the comment that in times of adversity, you'll have a lot of people putting their hands up. When things go well, no one wants to do anything. But when things are going against you, you'll have a lot of people out there. So just bear that in mind when you're talking about numbers.
Thanks, John. I'm just mindful we've got about 15 minutes left, so just really want to kind of try and get through this last bit.
Yeah, so we've really just got a couple of key questions there around community boards. Are community boards helping to achieve effective representation? And bearing in mind the questions about, you know, do people know what you're doing? That's not uncommon, but I guess there's a sense that yes, they are assisting in that process. So two key questions just for your guidance again. Do we want to retain the existing community boards, and is there any wish to at least explore perhaps talking to the community about whether we wish to establish one or more new community boards? And just to fly a couple of kites, combining Corriedale and Oamaru, a standalone Corriedale or a standalone Oamaru. Those are ones that have been floated in the past. Certainly I would raise the question that given that Oamaru already has 6 elected councillors, the argument for it not achieving effective representation at the moment might be a difficult one to make.
Alex?
Yeah, the mayor and I discussed this on the way back from our meetings way down south yesterday. And we thought we should be asking the question as to whether, if we believe in localism, whether community boards should be present in other areas to devolve decision making. But that probably the answer was no, but we need to look at some other arrangements for that. We've started down a route of setting up subcommittees for those areas to, decision making to those councillors there, but whether there's a sort of a compromise position that doesn't have the expense and administration of a community board, but instead you have the ability to appoint others to that subcommittee to get a wider representation to supplement those councillors on there have more delegated decision making about matters within those areas as maybe a compromise on that to get some of that localism and not having everything that is local coming through council.
I personally would like us to see us investigate Corridale community board. That's my view.
Ainsley, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to follow on from what the CE said there. Is that something that you would like us to explore? And if so, would that be part of an interest in preliminary engagement, which Stephen is going to come to shortly? So again, it's one of those questions that if you want to consider appointing community representatives to the subcommittees as an alternative to having a different arrangement, or if you want to investigate having a Corridale ward, community board, then is that something you would like us to go out with preliminary engagement before the initial proposal and the final one? So that Stephen will come to that in a minute. Thank you.
Guy and then Jim.
Yeah, over the years we've discussed a community board for Corridale, but just the logistics of getting representation across the vastness that we have in Corridale, like it's from Kakanoo to Takaraki, it's from Glenavy to Herbert. How on earth would you actually get the representation to cover the area that we need to? It's huge. In pockets of communities, Napara, Cara Hill, Enfield, it just goes on. Papakaya, you get out the plains, Georgetown. I mean, how would a community board be able to represent the vastness of that community? And therefore, I was discussing with Gary and all over the years, and as much as when I first came here, I thought it would be a great idea, but the more we got into it, I realised how futile it would be. So John and I will take the brunt of it.
Perhaps just note that is the kind of example where establishing subdivisions within a community board area can be effective, because you can you might, for example, divide the community board area in two, so that you have a set number of representatives from each subdivision. My most recent council was Selwyn. We have the Melbourne Community Board up there, which also covers a huge and diverse geographical area, and that's always been divided into two subdivisions, so that you are getting representatives from both the northern and the southern ends. And that's just an example of where that subdivision option does hold some merit.
Can I say something? You're actually saying a good point. In our community board area, what we have is every town has a very active community committee. So Duntroon's got its DDDA, I think it's called, and Kiriau's got the trust. We've got the OI in Otamatata and the business group in Merrimah, and really they drive what they want done in their towns. And to get that done, they come via the community board, because most of us probably are on those committees as well. But that would be one way around it. I don't know, like Georgetown. I mean, is there enough people in Georgetown where they'd have a week committee that would actually do that? Hard to say. But that is how the the Arahiri ward works is because we've got those, driven people in each township that are doing the best they can for the town. And with the help of the board, we get, projects done and, funding from council or whatever needs to be done is really driven by those committees in those towns.
Thanks, Carl. Jim?
Look, I'm very glad that Federated Farmers Planning Advocates aren't watching because I'm going to have to disagree with Tim. My view is, given the kind of rate rises we've been talking about and saying how reluctant we are to actually propose to people, the idea of inventing an expensive way of representing a community of interest when there is an inexpensive one seems to me to be folly. And I prefer the Gary Alex proposal that a committee or subcommittee with the councillors and other co-opted community or council elected representatives with delegated authority to make decisions for the Corriedale ward, similar to those that the community boards can do in Waihimo and Hariri, is more cost effective, easy to do, and yeah, just to my mind, a tidier, neater and cheaper solution.
Just to be clear, we were proposing it for the Oamaru ward as well.
Look, I don't think we need it. I don't think we need it, to be honest. I'm sorry, we've got 6 councillors here. To me, that's just double dealing and double handling. If you want to do that, just create a community board, create a community council of the committee of the 6 councillors.
We have.
So we have done that. We've created a subcommittee, and it was about the ability to supplement that with, other appointees, potentially similar to what we do with the harbour subcommittee at the moment.
Thank you. Jim, see?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can't see the point of establishing any more discussion groups. I looked at my colleagues on the left and they can't even agree with each other, let alone achieve anything. But no, in all seriousness, I think from my experience with the Waihimo Community Board, it's only since we strengthened the delegations and as we continue to educate and empower the boards that they're going to increase their effectiveness. But creating any further boards, I would not support.
The delegations that's come about is really interesting because I can remember Councillor Hopkins when I first was on the board saying, why don't we just give the boards 80 grand, let them go and do what they need to do? And here it is 15 years later, it's finally come to, fruition. So thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Stephen. We'll keep moving. We've got 5 minutes left.
Yep, we're effectively through the main part of the discussion this afternoon. And as Ainsley has mentioned, we do just need to touch on preliminary engagement. So I guess to tie this part of the discussion up, what appetite is there for staff to work up any options around the kind of proposals that have been discussed here around community boards? Are you happy that we at least look at those, or is that a direction we don't wish to pursue?
Question, if we took a variation discussion consideration of the proposal Alex has put forward, it wouldn't have to be part of this process, would it? We could create those committees or subcommittees.
Absolutely, yes.
Any old time we like. Well, to my mind, I favour that solution first and foremost. Our other matters, 5, 6 elected reps and Oamaru, maybe minor boundary tweaks, but if it were me, I'd be keeping the changes as minimal as possible.
John?
And on that basis, do you think that we need to go out to preliminary engagement, knowing that there'll be full consultation on the initial proposal and the full one? So this is the point. This would be a third round, a first round before 1 and 2, if you see what I mean. That's the question.
just to clarify, the consultation only on the initial proposal. Yeah, on the final proposal, it's only appeals and objections, but yeah.
So can I clarify that initial consultation? I haven't been through this process before. We would set out also that the proposal is not to create any more community boards, but we could set out in there what we're proposing to do instead, albeit that that's a separate process.
Yes, you could definitely refer to other processes that are underway or being thought about, as part of that.
John?
Just on community boards to start with, and again, this is me speaking, not because I haven't talked to anybody else, but I get asked to go to 2 or 3 meetings every fortnight, which is how Corridor works. So it could be the squash club or the dog trail club, whatever it is, go and sit in there and listen to all that. We don't have a commercial space in any of the small towns other than like the Enfield pub or that's my thing about the Hampton store. We don't have a community that actually has a well-being, for want of a better way, lots of a Curau item tub and anything else. We have basically a rural ward that probably the rural people do their own thing, and when they want something done, they'll ask for it. They'll come through us. So to sit around another meeting, they just don't abide that sort of thing. Secondly, I think we've had a pretty good discussion, and my feeling is I don't think we need to change a hell of a lot. I think it's pretty much covered off the way it is, and I don't think we need to actually waste too much more time on it, and it's not broken, so why do we go any further?
Okay, any other comments? No.
Summary, then we won't be having we won't be having 3 rounds of consultation. We'll only be having 2. Is that right? 1.
Wow, yeah, so that's what's been put out there. That's the feedback we need, because if we're going to go to preliminary because you want to do something more drastic, then it will have to happen very quickly, because the initial one's got to be done soon after that, and we need to feed in the feedback from the preliminary one into the initial. So at this point, I'm sensing that there isn't an appetite, but to you, Madam Chair, to rule on that.
It doesn't sound like it. I think people are quite happy with how things are going at the moment from what you've been talking about.
Okay, thanks.
It's really helpful, and that gives us a good steer, I think, in terms of how we move forward in terms of putting starting to work on the initial proposal. There's just a brief timeline on the final slide, which did include some provision for preliminary engagement, but effectively will now move through developing up the data and the modelling for an initial proposal, which will come back no later than the 25th of June. But if we can get it to the 25th of May meeting, and probably at least 1 workshop before that time, just to explore the data and how the modelling is looking before that point, and make sure that you are comfortable with what we're developing for that initial proposal, then would go out for public consultation.
So as you can see in there, I've put in a workshop on the 2nd of April, thinking that we may have to do preliminary engagement. But if that doesn't, if our modelling and other things on the mapping, and we need to go to the 7th of May, we've put that in as a backup. So those are the 2 workshop dates that we've got for the next round of bringing things back to you as options before we bring the initial proposal to the council meeting, either on the 25th of, what's the 24th of May, 22nd of May, or the 25th. Yeah, 25th of May, both. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Stephen, for for coming along, and also thank you to Carl and Heather and Brent, acknowledging him online as well.